So we had been hanging out with Moses, and we've been remembering our origins and our core values and our call to community and to meaning and to purpose and to a way of being in the world. And then last week we crossed over the Jordan with Joshua, and we stacked our stones to remind us that when we intentionally discern, God will reveal a way, even when the obstacles seem insurmountable at first glance. So with our stones serving as a reminder, today we move forward. The timing of last week's threshold moment was really wonderful for me. Last Sunday, after we stacked our stones and we made this threshold crossing, I went immediately into a time of intentional planning for what comes next at Wellspring. This past week, Tammy, Keitha, and I went on our planning retreat. Now, this retreat was supposed to happen a long time ago, and for a whole bunch of different reasons, the timing just didn't work out. But we could not have chosen better timing if we had tried. The community is moving from remembering into dreaming for the future. And as we were together and we were sharing, a theme kind of emerged. This is going to take time. This is a journey, and we cannot rush the process, no matter how much we really would like to. I have this desire inside of me that I just want to take off running, and I just want to know we're going forward, and here's where we're going, in a sprint. But that just doesn't seem to be the way that things work out. Patience is a virtue, and of course I've often said that it's maybe just not one of mine. It is a virtue, and I'm working on it. It seems that as we are finding our rhythm, that we will be dreaming, and we'll be faithfully entering into this season of discernment. And discernment is not a quick and easy process. It takes time and intention. And so in this process of merging, we're going to need to pay attention to our surroundings, to the signs that are on the road on our journey together. I mean, wouldn't it be easier sometimes if there were just signs that would point us in a direction, that would say, go this way and don't go that way? I tell you, I would really have appreciated a few strategically placed signs in my life, just sort of warning me, maybe don't do that. Like, for instance, don't do that to the haircut that I came home with in 5th grade when I was on a sleepover, when I cut my hair into a mullet that matched my friends. I mean, a little bit of discernment could have gone a long way in that. My mother was not thrilled. But making decisions can be really difficult. But wouldn't it be lovely if sometimes there was just a big, bold, neon sign that was flashing and telling us, go this way, do this. But signs along the road of life are not always big and bold and backlit and flashing. And honestly, I think sometimes even if they were, we would probably just walk by. But for the next few weeks, we're going to be intentionally looking for signs. We're going to be using road signs as metaphors to kind of frame this discernment process. So I'm calling the series this month, Signs, Divine Direction on the Road of Life. And each week we're going to use a street sign sort of as a framework for our wonderings about discernment. The sign for the reflection this week is a crossroads sign. Last week when we were with Joshua, he led the Israelites over the Jordan, or through the Jordan River on dry land into this promised land of milk and honey that they had been waiting and longing for. Our passage this week comes from the end of the book of Joshua. And in our passage this morning, we find a verse that even if you haven't spent a lot of time in the Old Testament, you may have recognized this verse. As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. This is another one of those verses that is oftentimes on the side of those cute coffee mugs and t-shirts. It's beautiful. It's a proclamation of loyalty to God alone, and that feels good. In this passage, we find Joshua at the end of his leadership with the Israelites, and they have been through a lot together. Joshua thinks, really, as he's preparing to say goodbye, that the people are at a crossroads, and that he's asking the Israelites to make a choice. Who or what are you going to serve? In Joshua 24, the Israelites are gathered and they're once again reminded of all of the things that had transpired, much the way that Moses did in his farewell address, remembering the dramatic deliverance from Egypt and their entrance into the promised land. But the book of Joshua is a challenging book and is filled with stories of war and conquest and the assertion that God had gone before the Israelites to allow them to be successful in these endeavors. Possession of the promised land involved violent dispossession of the previous inhabitants. These wanderers turned warriors had to fight the nations they found in the land in order to take possession. And yet Joshua gives the credit for all of this success to God. God had gone before them. God had done these great things just as God had promised. So to the people that were gathered at Shechem near the end of Joshua's leadership, Joshua is clearly pointing out the crossroads at which the Israelites stand. They can either choose to keep the covenant, to be loyal to God, and to live peacefully in the land that they have been given, or they can choose to worship other gods like their ancestors had and suffer the consequences. Joshua said, choose the old gods that the ancestors had chosen to worship, or Yahweh, the God who had delivered them from bondage and blessed them with the land. Who would they serve? Joshua clearly says that he and his family are going to serve Yahweh alone. This is Joshua's kind of warning against idolatry, and idolatry, I think, is something that we might be tempted to think, we don't worship other gods. But idolatry really isn't just about worshiping other gods, like the gods of the Amorites or the gods of the Jebusites or the whole host of other nations that make reading the book of Joshua out loud an adventure, to say the least. For as much as we struggle with the whole concept of chosen people and promised land and the kind of God that would promise one group something at the expense of another group, I think that this wrestling is really, really important, because if we are brave enough to do it, it can help us to turn and shine a light on our current context. What kind of God do we worship? It seems like we do have choices. Do we worship a God of consumerism? Do we worship a God of nationalism? Do we worship a God of white supremacy? Do we worship a God that is concerned for our individual well-being at the expense of someone else's well-being? Or do we worship the Spirit who is in and for everything and everyone? The Spirit that we do not take with us into new places, but that we discover at work in ways that are new and surprising if only we open our eyes to see. I think that in our culture right now, we're kind of at a crazy crossroads. It seems like as people of faith, so much of what we wrestle with and we see in the news can be framed this way. What kind of a God do we serve? And perhaps every new generation has to stand on the brink of the world of the future and choose. Given the circumstances in which we find ourselves, who will we choose to serve in the here and now? Feels like a really big decision, and really big decisions can feel very daunting. But I think that we are at these little crossroads every day in small ways. How we choose to treat our neighbor, how we choose to use our resources, how we spend our time. All of these decisions mean that we are choosing to go in one direction over another. If we choose once and for all, as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord, that is wonderful and that is powerful. And yet the degree of success that we will have in this choosing seems to be fleshed out in the little things of life. Joshua says, choose who you will serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. This week, I was really struck by the idea that Joshua asked the Israelites to choose who they will serve. Not what they will believe in or what they will believe, but who they will serve. I think far too often in our Christian faith, we get really preoccupied with the idea of belief. We spend a lot of our time arguing over minutia, and we split ourselves up into fragments over disagreements in belief. And maybe you've been asked, are you a believer? The question that Joshua's asking is really interesting here because it sounds more to me like, are you a server? Not do you believe in God, but do you serve God? We get to choose who and what we serve, and ultimately that will embody what we believe and what we value and what we stand for. If we choose to serve a God who loves all of creation, then in all that we do, then I think that can really help us to put our priorities in order. Perhaps if, as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord, became not just a cute quote on a coffee mug or a meme that is shared around Facebook, but more of a life lens, perhaps then that could become a habit. And a habit really is just a pre-made decision that would help us truly to seek God in all that we do. And not a localized, nationalistic kind of God that is for one group over another, but the God of all creation. What a difference it would make if we turned our eyes to see this way. If we take time to discern and to truly understand ourselves and our unique gifts and passion, perhaps these can help in our decision making, and it can make that decision making process easier. I mean, what a joy it is to serve God, particularly in ways that use our gifts to impact the world for good in a way that is close to our heart. What are your gifts? What are you passionate about? What ministry or situation especially pulls on your heartstrings? These may just be the road signs that can help us to discern how God might be nudging us to serve. One of my favorite quotes by theologian Frederick Buechner is, "The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." Talk about a powerful crossroads. This is the crossroads to which faithful, intentional discernment nudges us. And perhaps God has given our spiritual gifts and our personal aptitudes and our passions to us as signs that we seek to help us find that direction and discern our way. And perhaps even our heartbreaks and our outrage and our disappointments can serve as signposts along the way. Hindsight has a way of adding clarity, and I think that when we're intentional to sort of look back and see and reflect on our life and our journey and how we've ended up where we are, it's interesting to see that even in our wandering, it seems like divine direction is kind of leading us to that place where our deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger. And so as we take time to find our rhythm on this journey together, paying attention to the signs that are along the road on this journey, I pray that our journey will lead us to that very crossroads, to that sweet spot where we can clearly say, if you want to find me, you can find me on the corner of deep gladness and the world's great hunger. And what a beautiful crossroads that is, especially to think about and ponder today. Because today is World Communion Sunday. The World Communion Sunday is something that I think the concept of it is so beautiful. I love the spirit of this day. In this world that is all too often divided, where we often notice what separates us instead of what unites us, even and especially among those who claim Jesus and who want to walk in his way but spend so much of our time and energy squabbling amongst ourselves rather than unifying as the hands and feet of Christ in a world that is in desperate need of healing. In the context of our polarized world, I find World Communion Sunday to be just a little glimmer of hope. The idea that Christians of all kinds, all over the world, are coming together today around Christ's table gives me hope. And as we've been pondering just which God we will serve, I feel like this is a step in the right direction, a step in the direction of serving a God that is expansive enough to hold in love the entirety of creation. It feels to me like a glimmer of oneness in the Holy One that really is our truth, if only we can recognize it. And so on World Communion Sunday, let us gather in community around a table of grace, and let us be mindful to hold in love all of those all over the world who are also gathering around the table this morning.